All right, today we're talking about how to be rich beyond money. What does that mean? We're talking about how entrepreneurs can live a life of meaning, which is not just about the money. Today, my guest is Noah Rosenfarb. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and I feel so privileged every week to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from a range of different companies and experiences. We've had Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Grubhub, Redfin, you name it. Lots of great companies. Go check out the archives and you can listen to some of those episodes. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcast and content marketing. And you can learn about what we do by going to rise25.com. And my guest here today, first of all, before I get to him, quick shout out to Joel Gondara. 31dailychallenges.com is one of my past guests on the show. And I always love to ask my guests afterwards, who would they recommend? Because some of the best guests have come from personal recommendations, and he recommended today's guest. So thank you. Shout out to Joel for that. Noah Rosenfarb, he's the founder of Freedom Family Office, which is dedicated to assisting entrepreneurs in achieving predictable income, building legacies, and realizing their ideal lives. He's written something like 4 books, going on 5, 6, 7, maybe, taking a company public, sold 8 companies, done 45 different real estate investments. His tagline is really cool, is rich beyond money. And we're going to talk a little bit about what he means by that. And Noah, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. And I love to ask people about how they were as a kid. And you grew up in, we kind of had a little bit of a similar experiences in that we both grew up in, we're privileged that we were in, safe suburban communities, surrounded by people that were well-to-do. But I think you were raised by a single mother. My parents, my dad was a journalist. My mom was a travel agent. They never made a lot of money. And so I always joke that I was the poorest kid in town. And you kind of experienced that as well. And you ended up doing, shoveling snow and selling company and selling candy and babysitting in order to make some money on the side. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, no, in many ways, I had a great childhood. The challenge in the house was that my mom would work 2 jobs, sometimes 3, and I always knew when it was payday. And when I would go out with my dad on the weekends, it was kind of a totally different experience. We'd go out to dinner and we could order dessert, or if it were raining, we'd be able to go to the movies and then go bowling, And so as a little kid, I started to realize the differences between having financial freedom and having success financially and not. And I decided that I wanted the choices that money would bring. And so I was a young hustler. I always had money in my pocket because it was always important.
And so you shoveled snow, you sold candy at school. Did you get busted by the principal?
So actually the principal in 7th grade was better than most of the, administrations. He said, why don't you come inside? We have this closet. Why don't you turn it into a school store? And so I was able to, along with a friend, do inventory and figure out what we wanted to stock. And the money went to the school, but it was a great project for me as a 7th grader to build out a little store.
That is amazing. I can't tell you how many of my guests have said, I got busted by a principal and that was the end of it and they didn't get to do anymore. So that's really cool that the principal said, here, start a school store.
Right. Yeah, it was a great experience.
And then you also in high school were riding your bike 5 days a week over to babysit at 6 a.m. through the snow at a neighbor's house. Exactly what every teenager wants to do.
Yeah, it was a newborn and a 5-year-old, and dad was a roofer, so he had to leave early, and mom was an overnight nurse. And so there was a 2-hour window between when dad left and mom came home. So I'd get the baby up and dressed and fed. And when the 5-year-old woke up, get her dressed and fed and ready for school. And then I'd be off riding my bike to high school. So it was a grueling job, but it paid $20 an hour back in the, I guess, early 90s.
Good money.
Good money. Yeah. Couldn't complain. Then my after school job was at a law firm, and I worked there filing papers, and I always was ready to hustle and make some money.
As you look back on it now, it seems like there's a little bit of a warm feeling towards it. I could talk forever about my high school experience because I went to this affluent high school. There were kids that got a brand new car when they turned 16, and drove into the parking lot. And I have to admit that I had admired that at the time. My parents gave me a horrible hand-me-down used car that would embarrassingly stall every time I pulled into the high school parking lot, and my friends would see me and look back on it now, I kind of laugh, but it was embarrassing at the time. For you, you're in an affluent suburb. You mentioned about your parents, but was there ever, how did you feel about the fact that you're working and you probably had classmates that had much more resources than you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was just motivation and drive. I don't know that there was much regret or resentment that I ever really felt. I think maybe sometimes towards my mom, I wish she could have got it together a little bit better and figured out how to do a budget. I started the food shopping in the house when I was 9 because I said, listen, I know how to make the dollars go farther. Why don't you just drop me off at the supermarket, come pick me up in an hour, and
At
run you around.
9,
Yeah.
I
So
have a 9-year-old now. I couldn't imagine him doing that.
right. Yeah. So I grew up early. And I think in many ways it was a great advantage. And now I have a 17-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. And one of the things they often tell me is, Dad, we didn't grow up like like so there's a reason that maybe their motivations are different or their hustle's different. And,
Yeah.
I'm proud of who they are and who I expect them to become, but it's definitely much different than what I grew up like.
Well, you moved to South Florida, so there's not a lot of riding the bike in the snow for them, I imagine, unless you go visit the slopes. But I'm curious about that. I've interviewed a bunch of guests that grew up with a lot more means, or actually rather have a lot more means now, and they have kids that have a lot more means than they had as a kid, and they have to make parenting decisions about how they raise their kids around money. So talk a little bit more about that, how you
Sure.
choose now, and then we'll get back to your story.
So I think one of the things we've instilled in our kids is gratitude for what we have, and that even though I've worked hard for the things that we have and the niceties that we get to enjoy, we've also been blessed just by virtue of where we're born and what we look like and how we speak, and so as a result, while we can say there's a lot of effort that went into it, there's also a lot of luck as well. And in addition, I've tried to help them become cognizant of the value of a dollar. And so, there's a lot of things that I'm proud of, but both of my kids, when they had my son, his bar mitzvah, my daughter, her bat mitzvah, instead of having a very lavish party, they both decided to pack 18,000 meals for our local food pantry with their friends. And so, it's things like that give me the sense that we're on the right track.
That's amazing. Yeah. You ended up in college. You owned a restaurant on campus. I've never heard of that before. How are
So
you a
yeah,
college student owning a restaurant on campus?
so my brother had failed out of college, was working at a pizzeria in Arizona, and decided he wanted to own a pizzeria back near home in New Jersey. And he found an investor that was willing to support him in that venture. And he happened to find a pizzeria a half a mile from my college fraternity house. And so when that happened, I said, look, I'll go and partner with you. I'll put up some of my money. At the time, I had had some savings that I've accumulated from all the working that I had done, and actually from some stock market investing that I had done since I was a teenager. And so I bought into that business. I'd work evenings and weekends, and then I started a fraternity and sorority catering business because I was part of Greek life, and I recognized that there was an opportunity because it was hard in Rutgers. I went to the State University of New Jersey. It was very difficult to find a reliable chef to work inside one of the fraternity or sorority houses. So we provided a solution for them that was low cost, that had good variety, and we deliver them 3 hot meals a day.
Wow, very cool. And so you were able to balance your studies at the same time while you're running these other businesses.
Yeah, I think I was never much for doing my homework. That was just never something. I always figured if I could get a B without homework, I'll stick with that.
And how did it go partnering with your brother? Because sometimes, going to business with a family member can be fraught with difficulties.
It worked out well in the sense that I got what I wanted out of that experience. I think, unfortunately for my brother, he got sick while we owned that business and he had to have his colon removed. And so he was
Mm.
out of work for a long time. And as a result, when I graduated college, things kind of fell apart, and we had to, in a way, liquidate that business. We didn't get to sell it for a profit, unfortunately. And easy come, easy go. But I take a lot of valuable lessons away from that experience. So I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. By the way, I meant to mention this earlier, but reflecting back on your personal life story, you're growing up with your mom and your dad having different financial abilities, it's almost like you had your own rich dad, poor dad experience, but with your parents.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say it was a gift in many ways. And again, my kids don't have that gift of needing to feel what it's like to not have something that you want. And so, I was in a room full of donors once before an event for like a VIP donor session. And the speaker had asked, how many of you grew up, in a situation that you would call adversity, and every hand went up. And, how many of you have children that are growing up in that adversity? And, nobody's hand was up. And then it's like, okay, so is the adversity valuable? And are we robbing our children of that adversity and the, experience that comes from it? And so I think in many ways we have to manufacture adversity for our own children if we have the good fortune of being able to bring them up in a very comfortable setting.
Yeah. And then are there any tips that you have for doing that, for manufacturing that adversity?
For us, that we've always been very philanthropic and philanthropic minded. And so, when we'd go on vacations, I remember once we were in Curacao and we coordinated with a place for boys, orphan boys. And we went there and brought them soccer balls and sporting equipment. And my son played soccer with them. And, we've always tried to incorporate experiences to help those that are less fortunate into our daily lives, and as a way not only to recognize what we have, but also to show others that we're there to help them and support them.
Yeah. So flash forward a little bit, you become a CPA, you decide to start a family office specializing in helping divorced women, and you start this in 2007, right before the Great Recession happens, which ended up being actually good timing. Why?
Yeah, so I guess to help you with the context, before that, practicing as a CPA, I worked in my dad's CPA firm, helped him scale it and eventually sell it. And while I was there, I had an expertise in divorce forensic accounting. So family lawyers would hire me to testify in court about how much money people made and how much their businesses were worth and what they spent their money on and where the assets were. And so I had relationships with family lawyers. And what I noticed was that we had about $200 million a year changing hands between husbands and wives in the divorces that we were working on. And unfortunately, for many of the non-titled spouses, which were often homemaker women, they would get a financial settlement. And I saw many of them get taken advantage of by people that, took advantage of their unfamiliarity with money. And so I decided to leave the family business, the comforts of, working with my father, to start a family office for affluent divorced women. And I went to those same lawyers and I said, listen, you know me, you trust me. I believe I can help these women. I'll help them with their budgeting. I'll help them with their bill paying. I'll prepare their tax returns. I'll manage their money. I'll make sure they have an up-to-date estate plan. I'll help them, be responsible with what they've received. And so I built a business which was focused on that niche, using and leveraging the contacts that I had made in my prior business.
I want to ask you about that and some of the unique challenges of building that business. But before I do, a forensic accounting firm, you must have had some stories. So I have to ask, what is the craziest story of something? Obviously, we're going to anonymize it, but of some crazy thing that you discovered.
One of the saddest stories, and in many ways, one of the stories that influenced me to leave the business was we had a really unfortunate situation where a very blue collar couple had incredible financial success in their blue collar business to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars, and the wife was responsible for the finances while the husband was out turning wrenches. And when they were going through divorce, there was so much distrust that the husband didn't understand where the money was and how it got there. And there were literally hundreds of accounts that the wife was opening and putting money in and closing and moving. And he figured there must have been fraud. And he paid me over $400,000 to try and figure out where the money was. And at the end of the day, it was all exactly where it was, where she said it was. She just had something inside of her that was causing her to open accounts and close them and move them. And it just felt really horrible for me to be profiting from that situation. And so they really, in many ways, caused me to leave the business.
It's another parallel between you and I, because when I practiced law, that's what bothered me the most, is that I was enabling people to fight. That's what I didn't like about practicing law, and it drew me away from the profession of doing that. Yeah. Yeah.
The more people fought, the more money I made. And my preference was to get things resolved quickly and
Right.
fairly.
And just so your interests are not
incentivized.
aligned with
Yeah.
what the business model is. Yeah, it's not great. So you end up talk to me a little bit about what it was like, working with divorced women who, are coming into a sum of money. You got to build trust in them so they trust you while they're going through one of the most emotional experiences of their lifetime. And that's not an easy task either to build trust or to build a business with that amount of emotion wrapped up in it.
I've always been very empathetic, and I've also, had that experience growing up of trying to help my mom manage her money even as a young child. And so I think I was in many ways designed for that type of work, of being in a highly emotional situation, dealing with money with someone that's uncomfortable with it and feels like a beginner. And I've also always been a good teacher. And so I think the skill set that I had, and in many ways, my good nature and my, trustworthiness, which comes from really wanting to be genuinely helpful to people, I think all of that meshed really well with my technical skill set to be able to create a business that required high trust, high emotional threshold, high empathy. And it worked out really well for me as well.
That's amazing. And if you're going to start a business that has to do with investing, starting at the bottom is a great idea. So 2007 actually ended up being a good idea because you're investing money and the economy ends up, there was a tough for a couple of years, but after a few years got going again.
Yeah. And so I had the wind behind my back, which was certainly helpful. But I found that it was still not easy to figure out how to transfer trust from the lawyer in me to the client to me. And so it wasn't, fish in a barrel, but it was really great business that I was happy to grow and eventually exit.
Yeah. And you ended up moving to Florida in 2011. So a couple of years into this business. What inspired that?
My wife and I were walking on the boardwalk in Hollywood, Florida, where her parents had a second home. And we were strolling down there with our 9-month-old son over Christmas, where we had a break and we were on the vacation. And I like to play this.
By the
game
way, say no more. That just explains it right there. You're away from the winter. You're there. You're like, why don't we move somewhere warm?
Well, so I bought this lottery ticket, and this has been a theme in my life where I like to buy a lottery ticket because I am so money motivated. And I'd sit down and think, if we won, what are the things I'd start doing? And what are the things I'd stop doing? And who are the people I'd spend more time with? And who are the people I'd spend less time with? And when we looked at the answers to those questions, one of the things that came up was we'd live in Florida. And so I was, thinking that through. The reason that I like to play the game is because many times I don't need more money to do what I really want to do. I just need more courage and more thoughtfulness and more planning. And so we decided, you know what, let's make this leap and let's leave our families. Let's leave the business. Let's leave our network. Let's leave everything we've ever known and go for warm weather and blue skies and no snow. And we haven't looked back. It was a really great decision that we made. And certainly we could have more money if we had stayed in New Jersey, but I don't think we'd have a better life.
What were some of the challenges around starting the business over, if that's even what you did, or rather like building your network in a new place while you started the business? Because this is way before the pandemic. This is before a lot of businesses were remote.
Yeah, so I was commuting back to New Jersey at first twice a month, then twice a month for 3 days, then twice a month for 2 days, then every couple of weeks, and eventually I realized that's not the lifestyle I wanted. Again, going back to that lottery game, I really didn't want to be on a plane, and so I was regretting it and lamenting it, and that's what ultimately led me to sell the business and essentially retire for the first time.
Yeah, but that didn't last very long. What did you find after you'd retired?
Um, Yeah, so I was a professional investor. I've always been a good investor and someone that was started investing in stocks when I was just 9 years old, and then I started investing in real estate when I was 22 years old, and obviously I started a business, owned a business when I was 19 years old. So I had been exposed to different asset classes and always enjoyed the process of investing. And so I just decided, I'll invest my own capital. And then I had some families that I had worked with over the years. We were buying real estate together. And I figured that would be enough for me from an active income standpoint. And the rest would just be living off passive income and having my time to myself, and really focused on philanthropy. And unfortunately for me, the philanthropy wasn't filling my cup in the way that I had expected it to. And I got antsy and bored, and I was binge watching a little bit too much of Netflix and looking at my wife saying, is this really the life? Is this the contribution that I want to make to our world? And I felt like I was underutilizing my talent, and it wasn't in many ways. And I guess it's somewhat odd to say it, but I didn't feel like I was making my contribution that I should.
Yeah. And so you end up deciding I'm going to start a business again, even though I don't have to. And that's what became Freedom Family Office, I believe.
Yeah. So yeah, just the natural order of business was, friends would come to me, friends like Joel Gandera, and friends like Eric Rosenberg, who's been on your show. And people would ask me for help. Hey, can you help me? Can you look at my investments? Can you look at my insurance? Can you help me with my estate plan? Can you look at my tax return? Because people knew that that was not only a business that I was in, but it was something that it is something I enjoyed talking about. And I was doing unique things with my own money and my own family. And so people wanted to learn about it. And I kept saying, no, I don't really have a business. Like, I'll go out to lunch with you. But they needed more.
Yeah.
And I realized one day that these are really the people I want to help, And so while I was working on these nonprofit boards for causes that we care about, Jewish causes, education, food security, I wasn't really being able to contribute my highest and best use to the planet. And so I took a look around. I took at all these people that were asking me for help, and I decided to build a business to really serve them, because they're the people I care about most, which are
Right.
entrepreneurs.
And so it no longer became serving divorced women, but rather families. So talk a little bit about what was the market you decided that you would be serving and how you would do
So
it differently for them.
yeah, so I started a family office for entrepreneurs. I would say that the vast majority of them are selling their business, and so they come to me before they're going to sell their company. Maybe a little part of the story that we skipped over was in 2013. I wrote a book called Exit Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, and that was just more of a passion project, because I had a client. I helped them sell their company. I thought I was doing the best job I could for them. They told me they wanted 50 million bucks. After a number of years working together, I got them their 50 million bucks. And then 6 months later, I was in the therapist's office and they were talking about getting divorced. And I figured, man, how did this happen? Like, I was
Mm.
supposed to be this trusted advisor to this entrepreneur. And yet I led them astray by not knowing that what they were telling me wasn't really what they really wanted. It was
Mm.
broader than that. And so I had written that book and it kind of left it on the side. I had attempted, when I moved to Florida, to start a business working with entrepreneurs, and it was just too much effort and too much of an uphill battle. And I was too, content with my life and my income, that I didn't want to fight for it. But as time marched on, and I found this opportunity again presenting itself to me, with people coming to me with questions, I saw that I could really serve these entrepreneurs in a way that no one else in the marketplace was doing it. And it really, in many ways, appeared the same to me as it did when I started serving these affluent divorced women at a time back when there weren't designations like the certified divorce financial analyst, or there weren't people focused on the divorced women community as and serving them financially.
How, if at all, have you done this business different to ensure that it's something that you get up each morning wanting to commit your time to, and it doesn't, like in many cases, I talk to entrepreneurs who they end up working too many hours on the new business and doing things that they didn't want to do, even if they didn't have to.
So I think there was the good fortune of COVID in that instance for me, because I did have to work, 40 and 60-hour weeks, which isn't something that I was accustomed to. But I was happy to do it during COVID because there really wasn't much else that I was going to do.
Much else going on. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the timing worked out well for me. And now I'm back to the schedule that suits my lifestyle. I tend to work Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Wednesdays I spend with my wife. Friday I do things that are fun for me. And so I kind of have a good balance on a typical week. And then I tend to work about 40 weeks a year and take off about 12 weeks a year. So I have a nice, call it 1,000 hours a year that I work. And that's a good pace. And I would say what's different this time around was I recognized early that in order to build a business that allows me to live the lifestyle that I want, I'd have to put a team in place that would be better than me doing it myself. And I've been able to assemble a team of accountants, lawyers, and financial planners that I think each individually have deeper technical skill sets than I have. And so when you aggregate them together, they're way better than I am alone.
Yeah. And so what is the process now for clients that come to you that want to achieve some happiness, want to, whatever it is, exit their business and not end up in the therapist's office 6 months later? Like, do you have a particular process that you take them through for discovering what that rich beyond money means and then actually following through on implementing it?
We do. It all starts with a small consulting assignment. So we get a chance, what I call a paid interview. So they get an opportunity to work with our team, typically over about a month's time. They pay us for, some advice and guidance as to where they are now, where they want to be, and how they're going to get there. And we do that work on their behalf to help them discover from their own perspective. And, we do that work with married couples often, that if they're coming to us as married, or sometimes with a life partner, sometimes when they're single, but helping them think through what is the ultimate goal they're trying to reach. We refer to that as their true north. And we have some exercises to help them visualize what that's going to look like. What do they ultimately want out of their life? And then we reverse engineer, how are they going to go from where they are today to that future that they want, and figure out the optimal path. And what I like to say is the optimal path isn't always the fastest path. That sometimes the fastest path is to sell your business, cash a big check, and boom, you've got the liquidity. But usually that doesn't produce a great result. And so what we want to do is help them optimize for the ultimate outcome, which is to have that life that's rich beyond money.
Yeah. This is great, Noah. And I love that you're helping people in kind of basing it on your life story and your life experiences and being able to kind of give back in that way. You mentioned earlier you've been dedicated to Jewish causes. I wanted to ask you about the last 6 months, 4 months, 3 months, something like that, have been hard. We're recording this in 2024. Of course, in October, there were some horrible, terrible terror attacks that happened in Israel. What has the last few months been like for you?
A challenge for sure. I think as somebody whose last name is Rosenfarb, it's pretty obvious to most people that I'm Jewish as soon as they hear my name. And to see the anti-Semitism that's so out in the open and so blatant that wasn't there before October 7th was really challenging to witness. My grandfather
was there, but we didn't know, right?
Yeah, because it was under the surface.
Yeah.
And my grandfather survived Auschwitz and the Death March, and my father's mother as well, who I never got to meet. And so it's amazing to me that just 80 years from when he was liberated from Auschwitz, there's so much vitriol and hatred towards Jews for what they believe. And I guess it's a problem that's been around for thousands of years. And so I shouldn't be surprised that it still exists, but it's a challenge nonetheless. And I've got a 17-year-old son who's soon going to be off to college. And it amazes me that even before October 7th, we were doing research on will he feel safe on a college campus as a Jewish student. After October 7th, that's just been amplified.
Yeah, I've talked to others who a friend of mine who's Jewish said her daughter was at one of these universities that we've seen in the news and was just not feeling comfortable at all on campus because of a lot of the different protests that were happening right after the attacks.
Yeah. So I think for any of you listeners that maybe know somebody that's Jewish, care about somebody that's Jewish, I would always encourage you just to reach out, ask somebody, how are they doing? How are they feeling? Because often for many of the Jewish families that I'm speaking with, they do feel alone. They feel ostracized. They feel like, they're the bad guy in this situation somehow. And so if you could extend that olive branch, extend that, acknowledgement to them that you're thinking of them, I know it'll be appreciated.
Yeah. Noah, I really enjoyed hearing your story, and I'd love to wrap up with the question that I always ask people, which is, I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude publicly for those who've helped you along the way in your journey. And I'd love to just hear if there are, a few peers or contemporaries or other entrepreneurs, other founders who you'd want to call out and thank them.
There's dozens and dozens, nobody gets here alone. I'd say one really formative experience that came out of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, of which I've been a member for 11 years. I've been in part of the same forum, which is a component of EO, where I meet every month with the same 8 other entrepreneurs. I've been in the same group since inception. People have come and gone, but the group is the same. And there was a time, recently in my life where I was always struggling with what is my capacity to achieve financial success and business success, given my strong preference to have a lifestyle that I enjoy and one where I can prioritize what's important to me, which often isn't spending more time at the office. And so I had this, incredibly self-limiting belief that took me a long time to work through. And my forum was really helpful in getting me to understand that, Richard Branson, somebody I admire, Mark Cuban, someone I admire, that they're able to operate with the same 24 hours in a day that I have and that my peers have. And, the amount of time that I might spend toiling on my business is not necessarily going to be directly correlated to the financial success or the business growth that we're going to have, that it's really about working smarter and not harder. And so that's in many ways what's motivated me to create another business when I didn't have to, because I wanted it to be part of my portfolio of life and the things that I do that are important and rewarding to me. But I didn't want it to detract from all the other good things that I have, like my freedom of time and freedom of money.
Yeah. No, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you do?
So if they had an interest in talking with my team, they could go to talktofreedom.com and book an exploratory call to learn about the type of work that we might do to help you become rich beyond money. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I post there about wealth and lifestyle and real estate and taxes. So you could always follow along there. And my business website is freedomfamilyoffice.com.
Great. Noah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.